Hello, GitHub. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever in the world you are. Welcome to GitHub Startup Wednesday. Good morning, good afternoon. How are we doing today? I hope everyone is having a good end of year. I know it's not the end of year yet. I want it to be, but we're still working, which is fine. I hope everyone had a lovely break for those of you who are on the east side of the world. And if you do Thanksgiving, that you had a good Thanksgiving break and you're ready to kick off however you celebrate, whether or not. I think everyone should have the month of December off regardless. But that's probably why I don't make the big bucks. Stuff like that. So welcome to GitHub Startup Wednesdays. This is a space where we celebrate the amazing innovators that are building in the startup space. We are incredibly grateful and humble for the opportunity at GitHub because we can actually support startups, not only with amazing credits as part of our GitHub for Startup program, but with a great community. The startup program value beyond, of course, getting your enterprise licenses, getting your cool, I think you get some Azure credits, you get a ton of stuff, friends. Beyond that is the amazing network and the founders and the connections. And the folks who are leading this program internally are absolutely committed to making sure that all these startups are incredibly successful. So it's a really good opportunity. If you are thinking about building something, definitely build it on GitHub and definitely take advantage of the GitHub for Startup program. Take a look at the link on the screen. You can find all the details about what is included in the offering and how you can apply for the program there. And of course, if you are already a startup, and if you are a startup that is using GitHub to build, whether or not you're part of the GitHub Startups program, please give us a shout if you would like to be featured in this show. We have a broad variety of companies. I mean, we have a little bit of everything, really. We have a ton of variety. I'm not going to lie. I'm biased always. Anytime there is an open source involvement, I get a little bit more excited because it's so great that we're actually building on top of open source and helping maintain and sustain this incredible resource for us all. So welcome again. I have a super special guest today. I've been trying to actually set up this time and we had to postpone, and I apologize deeply. A few weeks ago, we had to postpone because I had some technical issues internally. But fear not, today we're going to talk to Danny Sheridan, co-founder and CEO of Fern. Fern is from Y Combinator class of 23 or W23, I believe that's how that's pronounced. Danny spent 3 years at Amazon and AWS, saw how the company built internal tooling to generate SDKs in popular programming languages, Python, etc., and automatically maintain them in the API reference. And so he started Fern after that to make it easier for companies to offer best-in-class SDKs and API docs. His company, Fern, is based in Brooklyn, New York. I'll be there tomorrow, New York. I'm coming for you. And they're under 20 people, so this is such an amazing time in a startup. Danny, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I hear you're coming to New York. How do I get part of that in-person visit?
I am. Well, it's a boring visit. It's not a fun, like there is a fun conference or we're speaking anywhere. No, not at all. It's more like, I'm not gonna lie, it's not fun. I'm gonna go see Hamilton on Friday.
Great, give me an invite.
Yeah. So it's gonna be cool. I'm excited to bring the family and just like do some Christmas things. But I of course you're there year round. So excited. Are you from New York originally? Is that why you're building in Brooklyn?
I am not. We just, my family's from Ohio and we wanted to be closest to the biggest talent pool that we could get without being like a 6-hour flight and 3-hour time change away from family.
I love that. And so your startup, Fern, you have now under 20 employees. Are they all New Yorkers? Are you remote first? Tell me a little bit about it.
Let's see if we can even see it a little bit, but we are 100% in person.
Hi, Fern.
Yeah,
I love it.
The entire team comes into the office every day. We are in the Williamsburg neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York.
Beautiful.
This feels like the best place to go build a developer tool company right now. We are really privileged that the talent pool is maybe you'd assume this with New York, the talent pool is exceptional. And it gives us folks, we typically hire folks with something like 6 to 8 years of professional software engineering experience.
Wow.
That's kind of our target engineer. Again, we've got a small but mighty team of under 20, and at this point are serving over 125 customers. So one of the fun things that I'll actually open up with is how we talk to customers. So thanks for sharing my LinkedIn. One of the things that we do is we like to do Slack channels, and we actually have over 200 Slack channels with customers or prospects where we're constantly going back and forth. But it makes it really fun when every engineer or the sales team has very direct access to customers.
I love that because you're having that direct line of communication with everyone. That's awesome. Is this the Slack channel that you shared with me, the community Slack channel?
Yeah. So one of the things that folks can do, so you can get a private Slack channel if you're a paying customer.
Of course.
Or if you're a user that wants to check out Fern, you can join our community Slack, and there are a couple of public channels. My favorite of those is the contributions channel, where folks are actually helping us improve our open source project.
That's amazing. Okay, well, let's dig right in because I wanna get to a demo too. I'm excited to see this. I think that regardless of where you sit on the in development stack, if you are front end, back end, whatever, you're gonna interact with APIs at one point. This is going to be part of your day to day, and it's so great that you took the experience from watching, which I can only imagine must have been pretty daunting, working in such a humongous company and working for AWS. That's such a crucial and critical product for so many companies themselves, and taking those lessons and then helping our lives be easier. So tell me a little bit about what was the problem that you were trying to solve with Fern specifically, for folks who might not be so familiar with the API development space?
I think the best place to start is to talk about AWS's problem.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Cool. AWS had a problem, and that was they're a public API for interacting with S3. Makes sense. The simple storage solution. There's also a public API to interact with EC2 if you need compute, and DynamoDB, and SageMaker.
So we're up to 4 or 5
and
now.
CloudFront and CloudTrail, and we could probably go for about another 300 services.
Wow.
And each of those services builds API first. And what that means is that when the product team is figuring out what that interface should look like for internal use, they have the assumption going in that it's going to be a public-facing API endpoint. And so that ensures a pretty high bar. There are a couple of things that happen. One is you need consistency in naming conventions. If someone's using the S3 API and then they go over to try to use EC2, it should feel the same. There should be that standardization across them and consistency. The second thing that it does is, oh boy, there could not be a central team to release a new API. It would just take too long if it all had to go through one central team. With 300 services, they should be able to iterate at their own pace, especially with Bedrock, the AI foundational model platform available through AWS. They're constantly shipping and delivering. And so one of the things that I got to see is that no team is blocked on releasing a new API. Typically at a company, the way that it works is when you change your public API, it would open something like a Jira ticket or Linear for the newer age companies. But it would open a ticket, and then it might go to the SDK engineering team or the developer relations team or just the backend engineering team. And then my API just changed and I had a release, but maybe my Python or my Ruby SDK are not changing at the same cadence. It might take 1 month to get to the Ruby ticket, and it might take 3 months to get to the Python ticket, depending on who's picking those up. And that creates a frustrating experience for developers because I want to use the latest functionality that I might have just seen on X that was posted by a company, but it's not updated in my Python SDK. And so to me, it doesn't exist because I want to be an SDK first developer. That's definitely a trend that we've seen, is that especially developers who are earlier in career, they would much prefer to interact with an SDK, which takes care of making API calls rather than making HTTP requests to the API directly. And so that's a big theme here is, one, there are more junior developers in the world and they prefer using SDKs. Two, there are more SDK languages than ever before that you might need to support. I'm going to throw things like JavaScript, Python, Go, Java, Ruby, C#, PHP, Rust, Swift, Kotlin, and again, we can go on. It's pretty hard to staff an engineering team to cover 10 plus programming languages every single time an API changes. So what AWS ran into is it just doesn't work to staff a team to go write code by hand. There are just too many changes. They were shipping updates multiple times a week to different APIs. And so their solution was to build automated, really it's a compiler, but automated code generation that you read in an API definition, and then you output SDKs that are available on NPM or PyPy or Maven Central, depending on which language you're using. The appropriate registry has the semantically versioned SDK.
Mm-hmm. So big problem, enter big solution, managing that generation of SDKs across all those different languages.
Exactly. It's
maintaining quality.
It's managing building and then versioning as they change over time. Exactly. That the time consuming part is really the life cycle. There's a long time when these code bases are going to change. These repos are going to change. Okay.
So that was your aha moment. There's got to be a better way.
Well, if AWS built it, I think there's a question to ask yourself of, are they the only ones in the world that need it?
That's definitely not.
It could be yes. And so what I went out and did is I went and called a friend who worked at Palantir Technologies, and it turns out that they built something internally to solve this problem. So Amazon's is called Smithy, and it's open source, and Palantir's is called Conjure, and it's also open source. And I'll drop a link so that if anyone wants to see this, hopefully we can share it in the show notes.
Oh, please do. Yes, please do, so that we can. And I appreciate you sharing it. That's awesome.
It's kind of lucky that I got to see two existing solutions that bigger tech companies built. And then I started like hunting. And the question is, can you find other people that have also built this internal tooling? And again, the pattern that I'm looking for here is, first, can we find big companies that have ran into the problem and had to build internal tools? And then can we build that to be a generic SaaS B2B product? That was the pattern that we were looking for. And it turns out that Stripe built this internally. So now we've got AWS, we've got Palantir, we've got Stripe. Then we found out that Dropbox built this internally. Then we found out that Twilio built this internally. And at that point, I was like, okay, I'm convinced.
Wow. Okay. And so what you're finding out that all these companies obviously ran into the same concern, build their own internal tool. Some of them were open source. I'm sure probably not all of them were open source. Yep. Then you decided, you know what, there's a way that we can do this. It's a one serves all.
That's exactly the challenge. I think we're still going to see what the answer there is, but can you build a generalized solution that would cause a company like, I'll pick on Palantir here. Can you cause them to be like, we should no longer maintain an internal tool because there's a vendor that's reliable and battle tested that can do it faster, and they're moving faster with feature development?
That is amazing. It sounds like obviously there was an incredible need for big companies, little companies, like regardless, right? You're gonna be dealing with it.
I think that's where the surprise came from. I thought this was a big company problem until I got into Y Combinator's accelerator program.
Yeah. And then what did you find out? So everyone struggles with the same.
You know what I found out? My peers were building REST APIs. Not surprising. And they might have had 10 endpoints, a pretty small API surface area. And before they went to launch their API ahead of the demo day event, so Y Combinator is a 3-month program. And the end of the program, you get on stage and you get to present to a couple thousand investors. Before they wanted to go present, they wanted to show that they already had an API documentation website, and then typically a TypeScript and a Python SDK. And then they wanted to show adoption, that developers were already starting to use it. And usually if you said in 3 months, can you go start or like build a company and then get docs and get a couple SDKs up and running, the answer would have been no in the previous world. That's just too much. Just to give you an idea, we just had a recent Y Combinator company who reached out to us on Tuesday of last week. They reached out to us for the first time, and they wanted to go live with docs and 2 different SDKs by Sunday night. And they did. And I think the beauty, it's like, okay, one, why does a really small company care about SDKs? And I think the answer there is that Stripe raised the bar on developer experience.
Right.
The whole industry, people talk about the Stripe API. And for those that don't know, Stripe's a fintech company that does payment processing, and they're a payment gateway. They do a fantastic job of documenting how their service works. And then they have SDKs and popular programming languages that they encourage you to use. That's actually the happy path of interacting with them.
And their developer experience is absolutely outstanding. There is a ton of content out there. I think I've seen a couple of videos, maybe by Cecil or someone else in the space where they dig into how they build
I'm glad you
tooling.
got to mention Cecil, who's one of the developer relations advocates over at Stripe.
Yes, he does a fantastic job. And you're right, raising the bar for how you should work. And it's a problem that is not only for big companies, but also small startups. You just gave us a perfect example. So in your head, Fern can help these small startups, whether they're at the Y Combinator stage or not. You have limited engineering resources, but now you can compete with larger companies, their API offerings, because you're actually using Fern. That is fantastic. Fantastic. So company reaches out to you, a couple of days they're able to go live and they're cooking. Are you able to share who that was? Because hey, why not? Let's give them a shout if it's okay with
I'm going to give a big shout out. Maybe I'll go ahead and share their docs too. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that'll be fantastic.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and maybe we'll hop into a little demo now, if that's okay. Of how
that would be great. That would be great. While you find you share the company, yep. I do want to make sure that we touch it. This is the Open Source Friday, and me friends, you can take the girl out of Open Source Friday, or you can take the open source out of her. Because why was it important for you to make sure that this was an open source tool first? I have to know that. You could have built a company that, had a closed source platform that was going to be, paid service. And I want to know why you started there. And then, let's give a shout out and hop into the demo.
Yeah, the reason that we started building Fern open source is because if a service is going to be really compiling code and generating code for me, one of the things that I want to ensure as a user of that service is that I kind of have a backup plan in case the company doesn't work out. So one of the ideas that we had is, as an engineer, I would feel really confident if I could actually poke in and see how this code was being generated. I mean, we will generate, one of our customers, for example, is Square, the fintech company, and we power their SDK suite. Wow. And at Square, I mean, they're generating like hundreds of thousands of lines of code in each programming language. And if they want to go improve some of the generated code, they can actually go into the open source project, see how it's being generated, and go make a contribution or file a GitHub issue. And so we have really bought into the GitHub ecosystem. One of the things that let us do that was the GitHub for startups, actually. I remember still when we got 20 enterprise seats, and that was like a really exciting moment because the whole team, even the non-technical folks, was able to contribute to our project. All of our documentation is written in Markdown, a flavor called MDX. And so everyone on the team is expected to be able to contribute to the documentation describing how to use Fern, whether you're on the sales side, accounting, or product development as an engineer.
I love that approach to collaboration. That's awesome. It's a team. It's a team effort. So awesome. Do share.
I mentioned that I would give some credit. So the company is Scrappybara. And can you see my screen?
I've just shared it just now. Yeah.
Great. I think it's a fun landing page, especially for an early stage company. But if I head over to the docs, what I see here is that they've spun up some API reference documentation. They're describing how their service works. They even get some on-page feedback, like, was this helpful or not? And I can even enter my email. And then at the bottom, you can see that this is actually built with Fern.
That's amazing.
So they get to write some markdown content to power the documentation or guides or tutorials. And then in their API reference, here's where we get to see their different API endpoints that they have. And I'm actually going to show, I really like showing off some of our customers. So I'm going to show one of our other customers named Human Loop. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I love about their documentation is they take full advantage of versioning. So they totally have changed their docs over time, and they don't have to lose the previous version because they have some customers or developers that have integrated into V4. And so this allows them to kind of start from scratch, but to do that without losing all of the previous folks who are using an older version. If I go over to their API reference, you can see that they're advertising their TypeScript in their Python SDK, including usage instructions. And I think it's pretty exciting here to see a transition of startups not pushing developers to be API first, but pushing them to be SDK first. It results in faster integration time with less errors and frustration for the developer when actually doing the integration. And if I click into one of their API endpoints as an example, in their case, they use an open API specification, which is a format for describing a REST API. And we read that into Fern, and then we generate documentation. Our North Star is Stripe, as we talked about, but you can kind of see how there's a lot of nesting in some of these objects, and Fern handles it pretty well, right? So on the left side, we have what does a request look like? What are each of the properties in that object? And then I can also see on the right, what is the actual code for that request? And if I want to, they've defaulted me to TypeScript because most of their customers will use TypeScript, but I can also switch to Python. And this isn't showing me a generic Python request using like the requests library. This is actually showing me using their client library or SDK. And again, I'm going to switch back to another language. They don't offer a Java SDK. And so this will just show an HTTP request in Java. All right, I'll stop there for a second and see if you have any questions or anything that I can clear up.
Thank you. No, that's super impressive, and I appreciate you showing your customers, showing it live. Folks who are watching this, if you have questions, please do not hesitate to post them on the chat, and I'll be sure to give Danny an opportunity to share. But thank you for sharing. I love how you said you had a North Star on the way that you want to make sure that you're making it easier, and you're doing things with like the best practices first. Let's take a look at the demo, and I want to know what kind of demo you're going to show me first.
Here's what I'm thinking. I actually want to look through the artifacts of one of our customers. So I'm going to show you what comes out of Fern. And to do that, I'm going to go share my screen and take a look at Webflow. So folks might know Webflow. They're
your customer as well. Oh, wow.
They are a customer as well. Do you know Webflow?
Yeah.
Okay. They make it really easy to build a website. We're actually working on a new website here at Fern. And of course, we're using Webflow to build it. And one of the things is you can get a nice landing page. And then when we click Explore APIs, now we are within Fern. So I mentioned that we have a developer documentation product. We got to look at the Scrappy Borrow. We got to look at Human Loop quickly. And now we're looking at Webflow. So here's where they get to have an introduction for developers. What I really want to get to is within their API reference, they've done something pretty special. So you said, can I see a demo of Fern? I'm going to start with the outputs, which is you get a website, a documentation website that's hosted. And if I hit play here, I'm actually going to log out so I can show you this full process. So in Webflow, you can provide your API token. I'll delete the token that's in there. So if I go and I want to see my API token, what do I do now as a developer? In my mind, this is what I would do. I would be like Webflow, API token. Do you know what I mean? And then you're like going through Google. I'm going to go to a help page. I'm like, all I want to do is copy my token. I'm like looking through my token here. I might have to click on another thing. And by the time you know it, like I'm like 4 tabs in and I forgot what I was working on. You know what I mean?
Yes.
All I want is my token. And so they asked us for something that was hard to do and again, leveled up the developer experience, which is they just wanted a login button. It's like, can we just make this easy for the developer? And so when I log in, it brings me to a Webflow hosted authentication page. It pops up, and right now I'm authenticating with my Gmail account. I can see a couple of example sites that I've set up, and then that's it. Like they took care of getting me an API token populated.
Wait. But you handle the authentication. Fern handles the authentication and everything, or how to?
Authentication handled, and through a JWT is actually the process that we have this set up. The user comes back with a payload to populate this API token, and even other fields. So you'll see a site ID in here. Where'd that come from? I didn't enter that. And the answer is that Webflow knows my site ID that I was using. And so I can actually, so if I go to, let's see, get user info or get authorization info, I'm actually now making API requests in a no-code way, right?
Wow.
Like I didn't have to write this code, but if I'm a TypeScript developer, I can just go ahead and copy this. It actually already has my token in here, and I'm off to the races. I can start building. If I want something a little more complicated, this is showing me some optional properties that I can actually add in. And we're trying to visualize like a list of strings in this case, or even a Boolean, turning it on or off, and you can see it actually changing the SDK code. So our vision here is, I think a lot of the amazing things about Postman as an API testing tool is that it gives you an interface to go, a client to go make requests. And the question that we've asked ourselves is, can we build a similar experience where you turn an API request into a form, and you do that within the documentation because that's where a developer already is.
That's super, super impressive. It's been a while since I've built anything on Webflow, so I don't think this must have been pre-Fern, because I definitely don't remember this being my experience. I mean, we're talking like 8 years ago. Well, less than that, maybe 4. That is fantastic. And so, and I'm glad that you came back to the screen. You're still in the Webflow, because that was one of the questions I was going to ask you about, because obviously Webflow, you're using different SDKs, not just one language. You're using JavaScript, Python, and how Fern can handle that then.
The answer here is that Webflow, this is, now we're in PyPy. For folks that are more familiar with NPM, we'll find ourselves there for the JavaScript SDK.
Mm-hmm.
But if I go through their versions, I can see that there were multiple versions, even like days ago, that were published. So they're constantly publishing. They're at 20,000 plus weekly downloads. And all of this is auto-generated, including the usage and how to do OAuth as a developer, exception handling with errors, how to set timeouts, retries with backoff. And so the idea at Fern is that you should not have to have an SDK engineering team. We can help with that. You give us your open API specification. We will help set up, generate SDKs in multiple programming languages, publish them for you. And then maybe the kicker is document them in your docs. If they're not in the docs, they don't exist, is a common trope over here at Fern.
I so appreciate that. So this, beyond the wow, like we just saw, that is so cool. Because I know one of the things that and this is shout out to Webflow, because one of the reasons I love using it before, the integration partners, right? They have so many things that you can use. How is Fern help that? I don't know if there's been an impact to like the third-party developers and the integration partners that are coming to work with like a service as Webflow, now that they're now using Fern.
Bravo. Great question. It's actually one of the reasons why we started working with Webflow. Their team wanted to increase the number of plugins that existed. And there are kind of 2 choices if you're them for how do we increase the number of plugins that exist. One, we can either go after and send a person to go talk to a lot of companies like MailChimp, for example, and be like, hey, MailChimp, you should build a Webflow plugin. Or you can just make it a lot easier and lower the friction required to build, and let people come to you. And so what the Webflow team decided to do is they wanted to lower the friction required to build a plugin on top of their ecosystem, which led to a proliferation of plugins. And it's super cool to see like strategy into execution and then it working for their business.
That's amazing. That's amazing. That is an incredible example. And because it's a developer tool, helping a developer tool, it's like Inception, all levels of Inception there. What other use cases, what other customers do you have beyond like the developer tool space? I wonder if there's anything that's maybe not as conventional for folks that are watching and they might not, that this might not be their space. I love you could share.
I'm happy to. I think one of them that we should look at is Square. So Square is the fintech company that you might know of when you swipe the card on the small white, square or at the coffee shop. But they have a lot of folks, whether it's QuickBooks that wants to pull data from Square, whether it's I have 20 locations for my restaurant and I actually want to aggregate and pull that data. They house a lot of data that is actually owned by their customers that the customer might want to get out, and maybe I want to visualize it in Tableau. Maybe I want to get into my accounting software. Maybe I want to apply for a loan, so I'm going to connect my Square account. And whoever's offering that loan is going to need to go integrate into Square. And the right way to do that is via API, and a more successful, faster way of doing that is through an SDK. And when I say successful, I define successful as you, as a developer, I can set a goal, which is like, I want to integrate. I can have a timeline and I don't have to reach out to support. Every time that you have to reach out to support of like the Square developer support team, that is a defect in the process. And by using SDKs, one of the things we've seen is that developers run into less support needs, which accelerates time to build. I mean, a developer should be able to build in an afternoon, not have to wait a week for a reply from a support email address. And so in the case of Square, you can see that their SDK has the Fern API bot. And if we actually go to this commit history, we can see many times where Fern is actually regenerating and pushing code. And then there's an engineer on their team who's also contributing code. One of our beliefs is that you should be able to augment the generated code with custom code. And so what that looks like in this case, you'll see that we have GitHub workflows that are included in all of our customers. So we automatically generate this repo for Square, and we rely on GitHub workflows throughout the whole process, from taking an open API spec to running the Fern CLI tool, which is available on NPM, to then generating code. And if I go down, there's a file here that I want to talk about, which is Fern Ignore. And what this allows someone to do is they can add, in this case, they wanted to add handwritten integration tests. And so they can add a Webflow helper, a webhook, I'm stuck on the Webflow, a webhook helper method. And in their case, they also wanted to customize their README. So this allows every time that you generate code with Fern, we will clear out everything except the files that you've identified here. And so it allows generated code to live in harmony with manually maintained code, all in service of helping developers use APIs more easily.
That is extremely impressive. And I didn't know Square was your customer. That's really cool. And obviously, for a company that like processes financial transactions, security is a big thing.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, you have the trust of that company. So that speaks volumes of the way that firm works. And my God, like the amount of complexity on their APIs, like hundreds and hundreds of endpoints, like this gotta be, it's fantastic. That is amazing. For folks that, I guess actually a question on the audience, and thank you so much everyone who's asking questions. Keep them coming. I think we had someone ask a question. They're very new to building APIs. They're wondering like what the best modern practice is. Should they go with REST or should they go with something else with SDKs? And this is like an interesting conversation. And you're like, I know what your answer is sort of, I feel like what it's gonna be, but I guess if you're thinking about, if you're in the situation where you're actually thinking about how you should enable developers to build with your product or integrate into your whatever it is, your product, your platform, your tool, SDK versus APIs, like SDK is the way to the future, and obviously Fern. Any advice for people that are just now building? They're getting to that building part. Like how should that be handled in your opinion now, and thinking about rate limiting and in the future and all that as it affects, like when we're talking about APIs and SDKs, and of course use Fern is the answer.
First, I'll talk about API protocol.
Mm-hmm.
There are three common options for API protocol you can use today. The first is going to be REST, which is HTTP. The second is GraphQL, popularized by Facebook. The third is gRPC, popularized by Google. And the question is, which should I use, REST, GraphQL, or gRPC? What we see is that gRPC is the least likely to be selected. Really good if you need really high performance, like you're processing tens of gigabytes of satellite imagery data. It might make a lot of sense to use gRPC. If you need really fast system performance, but not commonly required for like pulling transaction data from the coffee shop. You just don't need that technology. And there's a whole learning curve when you introduce a new, less popular technology. So gRPC, not very commonly used. And if it is used, it's for internal service to service, microservice to microservice interaction that needs really great performance. The second is GraphQL. GraphQL typically used for front ends connecting to back ends to appease the front end developers. They're really the audience that gets to benefit the most from this within the relationship. And one of the challenges there is that if a developer isn't familiar with GraphQL, they have to go through a learning curve. And again, start by learning. We basically don't see GraphQL for public APIs. The rare exception, at one point, GitHub did it, and that was a bit controversial. Shopify has tried doing it. And I got to talk to a company that did choose GraphQL for their public API, and they said their number one question they got from developers when supporting them is, how do I use GraphQL? Which is just, if I'm trying to get adoption of my API, I don't want the first question to be like, how do I learn a new technology?
Yeah, no.
Unless you're a really strong advocate for that new technology. And so by far, I would say more than 90% of API calls that are between companies in the world, much more than 90%, are happening via REST or HTTP calls between companies. It looks like some folks on YouTube are REST all the way. Yeah. At some point, people said that GraphQL is going to take over the world and REST is going to die. And it turns out that that is just not true. I think a good proxy for this is to look at Y Combinator companies in the fall 2024 batch. We get about 200 plus companies. And if you look at how many of them are publishing a public API that is GraphQL, the answer was 0. It's like 0. It is all REST. That is just the industry answer. So if someone said, I'm going to be building a new API today, my first question would be, is this for internal use or external use? If you think like Amazon, that's not really a question, because the answer is you always plan for it to be an external API. It leads you to a higher level of engineering excellence to make that assumption. It's kind of like if you're about to build a coding project, assume it's going to be open source one day. Have good PR descriptions, be clear commit messages, have a good formatting for your GitHub issues. I think that it just holds you to a higher level if you know that other people might be looking in at it. And so the first question I would ask if a new developer was building an API is this internal or external? And if it's external, I would just choose REST, be done with the decision making, and I would use the open API specification to describe how that API works.
Thank you. And thank you to Harris for the question. I enjoy GraphQL. I still, from time to time, use Explorer, but I used it a lot more many years ago. Well, than now, honestly, because you're right on what it was created, and there's obviously limitations there. Talking a little bit about that, because actually you bring up a good point about API documentation and why it's important. And I feel like, yeah, sure, GitHub's API documentation is good. It can always get better. But why was it important for Fern to focus on having an API documentation builder as integral part?
Great question. When we started, we didn't think we would build API documentation.
Oh.
We thought that's a solved problem, isn't it? Aren't there a bunch of ways to spin up a developer doc? There's Docusaurus, which is a Facebook project. There's Astro. There are a couple companies out there like README and Redocly and Gitbook. Why do I need to go reinvent developer documentation? And the answer is because our customers kept asking us to do it. They wanted one vendor to solve both problems. Both documentation and SDKs have the same source of truth as the root of it, which is this open API specification. And they didn't want to have to set up new GitHub Actions that they maintained. And they didn't want to have to go buy another vendor and go through another security review. And so what we learned is that if you can allow someone to get to the outcome that they need, and I mentioned a Y Combinator company earlier in this conversation that on Tuesday said by Sunday we need docs and 2 SDKs live. They would much rather just interact with one software solution and achieve the outcome that they're looking for. rather than have to go make 2 different vendor analysis decisions. I think you're muted there, but I'll share that there's something that was a common phrase at Amazon, which is just work backwards from what the customer needs. And in my mind, the customer needed the outcome, which is that I need a developer to be able to go and get started quickly building. Like that's what I'm really buying from Fern or using with the product. Make developers successful.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And you're right though, like especially as you scale and nobody wants to spend time making vendor decisions and going through security reviews. And no, you find one company that does both things really well and then you stick with that. So that's fantastic. Versus all the other things that are out there, like what makes Fern different then? Like why would you, why have you been so successful, I guess, at capturing this very specific need that even you yourself did not think was one at first?
Yeah, I think that as an early stage company, so going into Y Combinator, we had 4 customers. Coming out of the program, we had 22 customers 3 months later, which is really, it's like an accelerator, right? It makes you go faster.
Yes, yes.
We're now at the point where we've got 100+ customers and we will continue growing. We've kind of earned the right to access problems at software companies. And when you get to see other problems, you're like, ooh, I can help solve that. And so now I would say that we actually have more access to problems than we can build. And so now this is like the product management sense, like that hat of kind of what should we do next? And we are very selective in not doing most of the ideas that we come up with. But it was just such a repeated request from our customers that my documentation really matters to me. It needs to reflect my brand and it needs to have my SDKs documented accurately. That we decided that we should listen to our customers and build what people want.
That is excellent advice. Founders, take note. That doesn't mean every idea that comes to you from your customers should become a feature.
Yeah, but what's nice is that we use GitHub Issues to track customer feedback requests. Maybe this is a good time for us to look at the Fern repo. If that's,
let's do it.
That you want to pull up.
Let's do it. And folks, please go ahead and don't forget to do something.
Start the repo.
We'll start. Let me see. First and foremost, go ahead and give a star there, please. That's very important. And okay, I think you can see it now. Are you able to see it?
Pretty wild that at a software company, I just love the idea that any customer of ours, any prospective customer that's considering us, and any candidate who's thinking about working here, I tell them just look at our code base. You'll literally see what we're working on. If we go to those 6,300 commits to the project so far, let's go ahead and click into there. Okay, so it looks like, yeah, every couple of hours here, there's some contributions going on.
Awesome.
Pretty exciting, I think, if you're a customer to know that you're getting fast feature deliverability. And you don't have to listen to us. You can go check it out yourself.
Absolutely. So folks, definitely go by the firm-api/Fern. Go to the repo. This is the public repo. This is.
And how many releases are there on this one?
Close to 1,200, no?
I think we just hit a milestone today of 1,200.
Yes,
which just goes to show that not much is built overnight.
That is amazing. You have 86 contributors. So external contributors, obviously a lot of them, because the company is 20 strong at the moment. And so if I'm into this and this is my jam and I want to contribute to this project, what can I do? How do I get started?
You know what you can do? Let's go to the GitHub issues.
Lovely.
The good news is there's a lot to build. If I go to the GitHub issues here, and the last one was just 2 days ago, let's go ahead and in labels, let's filter.
Let's see. What do we want to look at?
By maybe good first issue.
Perfect.
Boom. This is where they should start.
Awesome. Awesome. So
we are all bought in on the GitHub ecosystem. We actually used to use CircleCI to run our CI/CD pipelines. But what we learned is that as an open source company, we want to be able to allow visibility on what's happening in the CI/CD like pipeline and tests that we have. And so in order to do that, what we've done is migrated entirely from CircleCI over to GitHub Actions. And at this point, we're paying a real bill every month. It's really a part of running our service.
Oh, wow.
Because we'll have 20 to 30 tests that run on every single pull request that's made against the project.
Oh, can I ask you a little bit of that, about that transition? What made you make the decision? And then obviously you're saying, like you just said, the number one concern of every company, whether it's a startup or not, like the bill, is it worth what you're getting? Like, yeah, I love to understand a little bit more about why you decided to make that transition. And then obviously you've seen the impact, besides being bought into the GitHub ecosystem. Like, where did you see the value there? That was like a decision that needed to be made, I guess.
Yeah, the biggest value is you saw 86 contributors. As we build an open source project, we want to make it easy to contribute. So you'll see a contributing.md file that describes how to contribute to Fern. But one of the things that was frustrating is that it would just say like 2 CircleCI tests failed, and then you had to go log into CircleCI and no contributor has access to that. It was like the information was in the wrong place. I mean, this is the value of multiple tools in one platform. Because we were bought into the GitHub platform for our repositories, it was really easy to buy in for our CI/CD pipelines as well. So the one key reason that we switched over is for visibility as we're open source to contributors.
That's amazing. And I'm sure there was probably a curve of, I guess, what your amount of contributions switched from the moment where you actually had that practice.
Yeah, what we actually did is we decided one day that the next GitHub Action, the next CI/CD workflow would be built in GitHub Actions. And then we actually had both running for a period of time until about 2 months in, we were comfortable making the switch full time. And then basically what we did is ask ChatGPT to take CircleCI and switch it into the workflows YAML file structure.
You can do that with GitHub Copilot nowadays too.
Right, and so it was actually, we did that before GitHub Copilot existed.
Yeah.
That's literally how we did it, the transition.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, for sure, because I remember you mentioning something about that, and I wanted to make sure that's such a key feedback also for other builders and other startups that are watching this, as to why those decisions are made. And there is an overwhelming amount of things that you have to do as CEO. So it's cool.
It's kind of funny. At Fern, you might ask, why did you decide to build API documentation?
Yeah.
And at GitHub, I might ask, why did you decide to build CI/CD?
Same reason. Right? You just described it perfectly.
Because they go together really well, like peanut butter and jelly.
Exactly. That is awesome. Okay, well, so we know that if we want to contribute to Fern, go look at the first cause issues or look at all the issues. Yep. Join the Slack. I'm going to go ahead and put the Slack one more time. I'll put it in the comments so that folks can go ahead and go in and join up and then get involved with that Slack community. And then, of course, go by the GitHub profile, start the project. Danny, what's coming up next for Fern? Like, this is exciting times. You have such incredible customers. Like, I come to this with some degree of naivete about who I'm talking to, which I actually preferred it because I get to be surprised and excited when you share like, and this is my customer. I'm like, oh my gosh, that is epic. Anything else that's coming up that you'd like to share with our community?
I'll share one more thing that's coming up, which is pretty exciting for me, which is that I'm going to share one more website with you.
Please do.
Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, Launch Darkly.
They're a feature flagging website. Are you familiar with them?
Yes, of course. Oh my gosh.
Cool. In their developers tab, so this is like, if you think about where does Fern like to live, we love this developers tag. Oh, we love that tab. And within docs here, I am brought to a Launch Darkly developer documentation, right? Makes sense. In here, I've got things like guides describing the SDKs, integrations they have, and then it even shows me some API documentation.
Yes.
And what's really exciting to me is that they have made the decision as a company that it just costs too much engineering time to maintain this platform. They built this in-house, this developer documentation static site generator. It just takes too much effort to maintain it, and they're not innovating with new features at a rapid clip. And so we are actually working with the LaunchDarkly team right now to migrate them over from their own home-built system to scrap that and get over onto the Fern Docs product. And to me, that is really exciting as an opportunity when a company that already made the build decision reevaluates, then decides to make the buy decision.
That is incredible. And so, and again, another amazing lesson. We need to have a session, you and I, just about lessons for founders. But just because you built it doesn't mean you need to maintain it. And if you're not achieving what the end goal was, then there's a solution that can do that for you. Stop wasting resources on that. That's awesome.
Well, all the B2B SaaS founders will thank those people.
Yeah.
Buy more software.
Yeah, for sure. That's fascinating. Danny, this has been like such a cool conversation. I hope that you come back.
What's one thing you learned from the conversation today?
Well, that ultimately, from the beginning, if I'm looking to what is a business that needs to be built, and this what you do, that listening tour and figuring out that it was a problem that didn't only affect big companies, and seeing the need therefore also be open source first. I think that evaluation there probably saved you a lot of headache as a founder. I'm all for the pivot, and I'm all for, like, the company can reinvent themselves 20 times. But if you start with the problem that you already know there is a need for, you're already miles ahead. And
you know what's crazy though? We did some customer discovery and asked some companies if they needed help with managing SDKs. And they all were like, nah, not that big of a problem.
Really? And now they're your customers.
It was wrong.
Okay.
They didn't know what could be built. They didn't realize how good it could be. And so I'm a bit skeptical of customer discovery. I much prefer looking at something like, hey, Amazon and Palantir and Stripe and Twilio, they built this internally. They proved it. They put the engineering time to build.
Right.
That's better evidence than going and interviewing an engineering manager for 20 minutes on a Saturday morning, in my opinion.
So not so much the listening, but the discovery, like the research.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the insights, that we would not have built this company if we had listened. Yeah,
that's fantastic. And I love this, because now they're all your customers. And now they're all coming to you. They're all coming to you now.
One day we'll add GitHub to the list. Not quite yet.
Yeah. Hey, listen, we can talk for another hour about having that say.
Over at Stripe will get us in there one day too.
Hey. Wow, that is amazing. That's tremendous. Danny, I'd love to do a little bit of time machine as we're closing up. And you've been so generous with your time. Thank you so much. If there was one thing, you had it right from the get-go. But if there was one thing that you could go back and tell Danny, first week founder, this is something that you should look at from a different perspective, what's one lesson that you could share with folks who are watching?
The most important decision as a founder is your co-founder.
Oh,
we switched ideas. We were working on an API product at first and not helping people build APIs. And the thing that had the name of the company changed from what we had first started out as. The idea had changed, but what did not change is that founding team. And I think one thing that some people do is co-founder matching, where you like speed date and try to find someone ready to get started with you by next week that you haven't met before. And I'm like, oh, that's like really scary to me. It worked for the Dropbox founders. Actually, Arash is one of the founders. He joined in. Dropbox applied to Y Combinator. This is another Y Combinator story.
Right.
And there was a solo founder, and they were told, go find a co-founder and come back. And so that initial founder went and found someone named Arash. Arash joined the team, and they built a really successful company. So that's an example of co-founder matching, quickly working. And Arash is now a backer and an angel investor in Fern, so thank you. But one of the things that is shocking to me is I really would not get into a founder relationship, and I would advise this of myself, with someone that you don't know hopefully socially, in like some kind of academic or success-based criteria. And then you just really are willing to eat. I've probably eaten more meals with my co-founder, whose name is Deep, over the last year than I have with my wife. And like, that's just the reality of the situation. We do a lot of breakfast and lunches together here at the office.
Of course, startup life. And that is, that is like you're deciding who you're going to marry, really.
And this is not shocking, but it turns out that people's the most important thing. Like that's the one takeaway for me.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So if you are in the market for a co-founder right now, definitely take pause and make sure that this is not, because that lightning, that stroke for Dropbox does not happen every day and for everyone. So take your time, take it slow.
Some people who ask me who tell me they're looking for a co-founder, I'll ask them, of all the people you've worked with or studied with in university or high school, whatever it is, do you have like 2 or 3 names that are on your mind right now for who you'd want to work with? And usually the answer is like, yeah, I can. I'm like, great, those are the people. Go find them, go call them, go get them on board. And that's your job right now, to go get those, whittle it down to just a couple of names, the people that come to mind that are like, oh, I'd love the opportunity to work with them.
Yes.
And then go sell them, go get buy-in. This is like your first task as a founder, like get them bought into the idea and get them to probably quit their job and work on it with you.
That is excellent advice. Thank you so much, Danny. This has been such a fun conversation. You have to come back. We'll have to come back. Please do. And yeah, folks, if you're watching this, don't forget to please go by the repo, start it, join this community, join this Slack channel, go see the 200 plus Slack channels that are there, and start using Fern. Like, stop suffering. You don't need to do all this by yourself. There is a tool already, open source first, that's going to help you.
Thank you so much for inviting me on. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to continuing building with GitHub.
Thank you so much, Danny. Take care. Folks, that was amazing. I am so thrilled to know a little more about Fern now. I encourage everyone to take a look at their contribution guidelines. If you feel you want to contribute, check out those good first issues. This sounds like a really super fun, dynamic team to work with. So join that Slack and become a part of their community. And if you are building right now and you were thinking about how you were going to handle these 2 problems that Fern can solve for you, then you don't have to worry about it. Don't build it in-house. Don't reinvent the wheel. Go use this open source first product used by amazing major companies. So you'll be in great hands. Thank you, everyone, for being here and tuning in to GitHub Startup Wednesdays. As always, I am so grateful and humble for your time. Please don't forget, build your startup on GitHub. Go ahead and use that link that I'm showing on the screen to apply. Beyond what you get, honestly, the credits are cool. I'm just, like Danny just said, the people are the most important thing, and the people in charge of this program and the founders that you'll meet in this program, folks like Danny, that are going to enrich your founder experience tremendously. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. I think I'm going to be talking to, let me see, Amslov.ai, which I'm super excited because they were one of our accelerator startups for this last cohort that was all focused on AI. So that's going to be a cool one. And that's going to be after the break. We're going to be taking a bit of a respite for the next 2 weeks. I hope all of you have a wonderful rest of your year. And remember to build on GitHub. Take care.